just minimizing you guys out for a second. And I'm going to set it for print to make the print version. And even if you do decide to put it on the web, you can output it as a PDF, and it works just fine doing it that way. But I'm going to switch this to inches. I'm going to turn it horizontal, but you can click tabloid here. And these are just the numerical digits for points. I like to work in inches. For me, it's just a little bit more of a, I guess, clearer metric, but you could always change your artboards here. And remember, so 2 artboards equals 1 page printed front and back. So let's say, for example, I say 10 artboards, and I click create, and you'll wind up getting something like this. And like I said, that just before with Styliana's question, the artboards just by default set themselves up here as being horizontal, but it's just important to activate your guides first. You can always move this stuff in a minute, but just locate the artboards tab and then just kind of drag it out of this thing. And you can move things around in bulk too, which makes it really kind of easy. So if you want to move like these two, grab the artboard tool, you can just kind of lay it out, however you want. I mean, if you like it having, 4 across, you can just keep it the way it is. But I generally do. I think, like, for me, like seeing two, this is page, 1 and 2, this is page 1, this is page 2, page 3, page 4, and so forth. But finding the center point is also really important. So I'm going to drag, and this is what I meant before with finding the center point with your guides. If you drag this into the corner with the selection tool, you could put 0 right on the corner of your first document. So finding the center point becomes pretty easy with your guide. So I could just drag this over here, and that's 8.5. So if I zoom out, just to make things easier on myself to find the center point everywhere else, I can, just gonna move this out of the way, just drag 2 more guides, one to this end and one to this end here, and highlight them. So they're all selected, and just hold the Option key and just drag this across again and do the same thing twice more. Just hold the Option key, click and drag, and let go. And now I've got the center point found, on all of these, which just makes it really easy. Just in case, and look on this case, like this one went slightly over. I'm just going to nudge it with the arrows on my keyboard. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Nudge, nudge, nudge. And now I've got a layout for a zine, which might be a nice way for you guys to think about, presenting your work, for our entire semester. Maybe you make a PDF and a zine version of all your work, and you create a cool cover page and play around with it. But this is just a basic zine layout and how to make the layout for the zine. So I'll just call this zine layout. Oops. Template. Keep it as an Illustrator file. Drag it, but for this one we've already got, for our class kind of set up. And we need to, start getting some of our content, taken from, what we've been working on and build that. So, like I said, Derek and Melanie already, have added to that folder, but I'm just going to copy and paste this, come back here, paste this in. And just another little trick with, merging, these 2 things together. For example, the background of this is just, maybe I want to do something that looks like this. And notice you've got your rulers here just when you're working with it. So it'll tell you the height and the width of it. If I want this to just be 11, I could work with this to try and get it accurate, 8.5 by 11 with those numbers. Or you can just, set your document up however you want first and then fit it to size. But I'm just going to create a mask on this one. So if I pull a rectangle over this and I just change this to white, And then with the selection tool, I just select all of it, object, clipping mask, make, and it will trim away any excess, areas that you don't want. So, and if you, oh, well, maybe there's too much negative space above here. I didn't want all that. Just drag that down. Whoops. Just, get that to fit, I guess, a bit better. It's up to you. But when it comes to the portrait version of this, I think we should, try and put the emphasis on the portrait as an artwork. But then again, just do that same thing. Just create another little box over this. And change the fill. And a shortcut to get back to the selection tool is the letter V on the keyboard. Instead of having to go from here, back to here, just press the letter V. Make. And now I can just play with this in terms of how is this going to fit better into this area. And it does drag it into the corner. Nudge it a little bit. And if it's still too small, we could just trim it again, right? Just drag that so it fits. Drag it a little more. And think about, it's just a quick, cool way to get things to fit in place sometimes. If you just need it to fit just by creating a mask. And when you do create the mask, just keep in mind that it flattens the artwork too. So you're not going to be able to access your layers again the same way. So just make sure you guys are in the habit of not overwriting your production files. So so the idea is to collect a couple of examples from everyone, right? I think we said we were going to work with taking the original, Command C to copy, and having the original, and also just some of the experiments that you guys did with working with some of those apps. So, I'll just kind of do this again. This here, maybe the background is a little bit different, but and in some cases, I know that there's more examples. Like some people will do 2 or 3, but sky's the limit. Like if you want to make 17 versions of it, then that's awesome too. And of course, just iteration, send it back. And again, it's because I know that this is the same. Place this over. These are just some fast, little, I guess, workflow tricks, that you'll definitely develop with Illustrator. There's so many ways to do the same thing. So if I highlight all of this, just keep in mind that when I did that, I also highlighted the guide. I'm just going to hold Shift and unclick that. Same thing. Object, clipping mask, and make. And again, I'd have to come back in and trim that off too. But here's my original from the vector, and here's one of my iterations where I manipulated it. And everyone's going to contribute 2 or 3 of those by adding those to the folder in our shared Google Drive space, which says 8.5 by 11 student portraits. So right now we just have Melanie and Derek, and we have one of mine. So everybody needs to drag theirs in there, and it should be 8.5 by 11 pre-sized to make it easy. You can keep it as an Illustrator file if you want to, or a PDF or a JPEG, as long as it's 8.5 by 11. So I can drag it in there to work on. So let me just check our group chat. We're okay. Let's move into a little After Effects fun with this. So let me just save my file here. And just a fun way to kind of play with your assets, and be able to kind of manipulate some things and do some basic movement and animation work with a, with an asset. So in terms of this background, right, this guy right here, I'm just going to kind of copy him and create a new document so I can isolate it. So I have multiple artboards in that in that area. I don't need it to be 11 by 17, so maybe I'll just click on web, inches, and get an idea of this. I don't need this to be that big either, so I'm just gonna set this for 8.5. Oops. I don't know what happened there. Slow here. Yeah, sometimes Illustrator remembers your preset right away. So if I have 10 artboards set up from the last thing that I did, you may want to just be aware to change that. I could always resize my artboard. I go here, I'm going to paste this in, zoom out, make him a little smaller, and artboard tool, just make this a little bit smaller. So now I've pretty much got just an asset here that I can work with. I don't want any of the corners trimmed, so I'm just going to place this up a little bit, cover it, and save. Illustrator file, save, say okay. That's one. I'm going to get rid of some of these other things here. And maybe I'll grab one of these examples as well. Just get rid of the type. And let me see if he is still editable. All the individual parts, yes. I'm just going to ungroup it. Do the same thing. So now I have all these individual parts available. Copy and new, same thing. Create and paste. Just going to make him a little bit smaller. But in this case, I don't really need all of that bottom of this. So I'll probably I'll bring that up a little bit, even though it kind of distorts it. It's better than where it was. Drag, make this smaller. Oops. And just, hover all that and save my asset. Save as. Guys do this too, random numbers on your files. All right, so I've got two assets here that just gonna bring that down a little bit and trash. I've got two assets on the desktop that I can kind of work from and just, be able to kind of share. The ability to, merge a couple of assets into the After Effects workspace. And maybe I'll also import another kind of video to use as a background, but let's open After Effects. And it takes a second because it's going to load 1,000,001 different things. So I've got my gallery kind of like muted right now, so I can't see anyone. So if you guys have any questions in the interim, just drop them into the chat box. Okay, so the After Effects interface pops up, and we're going to basically start a new project. And this is where we can start to set some, some of the functionality and so forth. We're going to start off by creating a new composition. And this is where we can do things like create the settings. We can give it a name, Andy Warhol. And this is where I can set my dimensions. So let's say we want to keep this one, relatively square. I can make it the same size, 1080 by 1080. And this is where we can play with this idea of duration down here. I don't need it to be 9 seconds long. Maybe I'll make it 5 seconds long, maybe 6 seconds long. And as of right now, it's okay. Like I don't really need the background color to be any specific color, but this will basically be my workspace and my palette. So I'm going to drag the composition that I created down here onto the composition maker, which brings it into the timeline. And now I've got this kind of, just blank space here. And now I want to bring my assets in. So a couple of ways you could do this. You could double click on this area to do that, or you could just kind of drag, your assets in from the desktop or wherever they are, or from a folder, and drag them in there. And, which will give you access to, both of these right now. And then you're going to drag them from the project space just into the timeline in a hierarchy. If you click on it, you'll get a little, idea of it, of how it can be used. But maybe let's just play with this one here. Drag this down and place that there. And in order to kind of move things in After Effects, you're gonna, if you want to stretch something out, notice that you can, pull it out of proportion. You have to click on the end point first to start moving it. And then if you want to keep it in proportion, hold Shift that way. So, let's just say, just hypothetically, for example, I just want to show you guys some real simple stuff here with this so you can see the potential of it. But let's say I want to bring that background effect in that I had kind of dragged over here. Let's drag that in. And this is already an existing movie that a little animation that I already have, but I'm going to drag that, and it works in the same hierarchy of its layers. So if I drag this behind my asset, I can move it so that it comes in front of it, or I can drag this behind it so that it plays a role there. And you can also see how much larger it is than the actual composition space. So in this case, I can, just kind of make sure that that's selected as a layer and just start to move it and hold Shift. So I could just make it a little bit smaller. Down on my timeline here, we can see that the actual video is actually a little bit longer than the duration of the timeline itself that I set, which is just 6 seconds. But if I hit the space bar, or I can just kind of click here to move, you can kind of see how that background is already in place. If I click on that, I zoom in, just by using some form of an existing, motion-based background movie, it kind of gives my static image an effect already, right? It just looks kind of more interesting than, the character just kind of being there with no background or a solid color background. So that's one kind of fun thing that you can do with, some like pre-existing, subtle animations that you can make. But let's say we just want to kind of morph him in. Let's look at a couple of ways that we can do that. Kind of zoom out a little bit. And the way that that gets done is this little drop-down menu here gives us an opportunity to transform the image or the video in some way, shape, or form. And we can do some really cool things here. We can play with the opacity, we can rotate it, we can play with the scale of it, we can move the position or create anchor points to move things on a path. It gets a little bit more complex, but just in terms of the general opacity of things, you want to, just phase things in or phase things out. When you click on it, and we're going to create what's called a keyframe. And you'll see down here at the bottom, there's a little keyframe, a little blue dot is placed there, and the opacity is set for 100%. And if I click on that, and I click 0, and I hit return, it goes to 0, but now I can move the timeline. Let's say I move it to 1 second into the duration of that video back there, and I let go of it, and then I can scrub just by kind of clicking the mouse and moving it, and I can pull that to 100%. So from 0 to 100%, I can make my character just flow in. So if I hit hit the space bar to get a preview of it, I can bring my character in and then set another point on the timeline for where he may, phase out again slowly. Let's say, for example, I just place that here. And because this keyframe is selected, I want to click off of it because that will just select those 2 points. But if I want to create a new point, I come back to opacity, and I click that, and then I move this again so that I can do the same thing. I could phase it out now from 100% and just kind of scrub to the left with the mouse to 0 and bring this back again, and you'll see how I could just simply phase him in and phase him out. Right, pretty straightforward. And I could do the same thing with the background video too. You could also turn layers on and off. So if you want to see how that would look with the background off, just click the little eye off the same way you would click a layer off using, other, Adobe applications. And this way you can see how, that background may change. Hit the space bar to stop it. Bring it back again. Maybe I'll turn that back on. And maybe let's talk about doing something like, adding another layer and bringing another layer into this. And you can bring the same layer into it if you want to. So come back over here. Let me grab that character again, drag him into my timeline. And, maybe I do the same thing. However, let's flip him the other way. So let's go to layer and transform and down to flip horizontal. And maybe I just want to kind of bring the character across, and make him kind of move from there. So, if I place him here, I go to transform again. And I'm going to move him out of the picture. And I'm going to set, maybe the phase of when he starts to phase out over here. Then I'll set an anchor point for position. And if I move the timeline, to the duration of how fast I want him to move across, I can play with this in terms of its speed. And now I can click on the layer and just kind of move him, on that path so that he just kind of goes across. And I'm just going to hit the save button and just call this maybe CG2. Save. And let's kind of come back here, click off of that and test. Some basic motion, right? On how that works. So the idea of some multiples kind of comes in handy, right? In order for doing that. Let's say I want to just, add a little bit more interestingness into this, and I take that same video and let's drag that in between both of those characters. Let's make that a little bit smaller. And maybe we'll use the rotation tool and we'll rotate that. Whoops. Wrong layer. And if I hold the shift key, that'll get it straight. And then go back to the move tool. And maybe I'll move this now from here. Drop this down. Transform and position. So maybe when this starts to blur out, I'll hit position so that this can move at the same time as when that other character comes through to here. I'll move that across to there. Maybe I'll pull that a little bit further now. Let's see how that looks now. And you can just click, oops, sorry. Click away. Ah, no, I lost it altogether. Sorry. The hand tool, the handiest of all. 1, 2, let's just zoom in again and take a peek. So you have the ability to play with your layers so that you can place them in front of or in back of. And this will automatically kind of loop in your timeline to show you the process of what can be done with this. But just the general output of things if you like it, you know. And as I kind of look at this, I'm seeing now maybe that second video that I created here, I think that would work better if it was brought, you know, in front of, so it doesn't, you know, yeah. Maybe the opposite of that, right? Maybe that needs to go behind all of them. So if I place that here, yeah. So in terms of this and its output, to make it really easy on yourself, you can add this to the Adobe Media Encoder, which pretty much comes with your, you know, Adobe package. I think it's one of those free things, but it has to open. And when it does, I'll just to be able to show you the output of that. And it takes a second. You'll notice, you know, Photoshop opens, you know, a little bit faster than Illustrator, but when it comes to opening applications like After Effects and Media Encoder and Cinema 4D and some of these other larger, you know, applications, it's you'll notice they do so much more. So in the Media Encoder, we're basically just going to click the play button, and that will render the actual video. And depending on the length of the video, this one's just 6 seconds. You can see a little preview in the bottom down here of our little animation playing. And once it's done, just by default, it'll probably go to your desktop. So I'm going to click done, and you get an actual, you know, transmission log of the, you know, the bit rate and all of the other information involved here. It's not, that part's not super important for right now what we're doing, but I'm going to quit the Media Encoder. Come out of this, and you'll notice here that, you know, we've got another file that's created automatically by the by After Effects, which will, you know, put your production file and your outcome file. So if I double click on this, and even before I show that, notice that the outcome, you know, I've got it set to be, you know, an MPEG, you know, MPEG 4, which will pretty much open on, you know, any device. You know, .mov files and MP4 files will work pretty much anywhere. But I'm just keeping it relatively small, right? 6.8 is pretty good for the web and being able to upload it to social media and that kind of stuff, and so forth. But you have much more control over that in After Effects if you need to do some output that's larger. But I don't think we do in our case. But just to see how it works in QuickTime, I'll set it to loop and click play. And you know, here we have our little animation just kind of as a set loop. You know, I can see there's a little stopping point at the edge there where, you know, if I don't want that to, you know, stop that way, I can trim a part of this later and just have it play as a continuous loop. But that's just a little